why I was unable to scale was because the industry itself was very, very disorganized.
And I wish I met you when I was failing.
I see so many people pursuing data science, for example. We feel like, oh my God, AI is coming, jobs are going to be scarce, so let me go after the job that I know will not become redundant. So look to your early childhood before you were socialized and you knew what it was like to be a good girl or a competitive child.
Hello from Bangalore, India. I'm your host, Pamela, and you're tuned into Transition Story. Join us as we listen to inspiring tales from our guests, glean valuable learnings, and take action to apply them to our daily lives. Please welcome our first guest. Sandhya, you look very pretty. I must say that.
Right back at you,
She
Pamela.
has, she has navigated an incredibly fascinating career path from being born into a family of doctors to pursuing law in her undergrad, then venturing into becoming a radio jockey. She continued to explore her passions, eventually diving into entrepreneurship. Along the way, she discovered her love for positively impacting people, leading her to pursue postgraduate studies in behavioral science. Today, she's an ICF certified PCC coach. Welcome, Sandhya. It's a true honor for me to kick off the show with such an inspiring woman and an exceptional human being. Welcome once again.
Thank you so much. I was jumping out of my skin being your first guest, so the honor is all mine.
So let's begin at the beginning. Your choice to move away from pursuing law and instead becoming a radio jockey. Could you share with our listeners how you approached this decision with your family and what thoughts were running through your mind during that time?
So at the time I graduated from law school, I was already married. So in a sense, I was quite independent by then, but not quite. Sometimes even at 21 or 22, your brain doesn't even fully mature at that age. So I still definitely felt that dependence. And I think I was quite influenced as well by people around me. It wasn't so much sort of bringing it up and getting permission from my parents, but certainly there was a lot of pressure, right? You go to a law school and it has a name, and everyone's like, oh my God, you wasted a law seat, you're wasting your education. But I think if I could speak to my younger self, if you ask me what I was thinking at that time, I probably just felt that drive. I heard the radio literally on drive time, and something must have just said in me that you have to be there. It was partly luck and partly, of course, my effort that got me there. But if I had to say to my younger self today, I would say that, at 21, 22, you're not really expected to know what you want to do for the rest of your life. And that's okay. It's okay. I do understand that there's education and money to be spent, but sometimes it's better to cut your losses and move towards what you feel is right, and do that with conviction and sincerity, which I believe I did at that time.
Conviction is the word that I really catch from this statement. Conviction is so important. You do, attribute some of this to your luck, but knowing you as a person that I know outside this show, I'm sure it was your conviction that got you where you are today. So after being a radio jockey, you moved into entrepreneurship, and that didn't, quite turn out the way you expected it to. How did it affect you emotionally? How did you bounce back from that setback?
So it was a step up to entrepreneurship. I did have several roles in management and operations before that. And I think it sort of was leading me towards a place where, I've done so many different kind of things, and then now what, right? How do you sort of tie all of these ends together? And entrepreneurship, again, you say conviction, but statistically, so I use the word luck, but sometimes it's coincidence. It's just how opportunities present themselves to you as well. And that the truth of it is that that plays a pretty significant role in the choices that we make in our lives. It comes to us, and then it's up to us whether we choose it or not, right? Or which direction we choose and which rabbit hole we go down. So this opportunity sort of presented itself to me, not really to set up a whole business, but I took it to the level of setting up a business. And I ran two stores. I had two brands and in multiple locations. With entrepreneurship, first of all, you should know that nothing ever turns out the way you plan it. That's rule number one. The second is something I wish I had known at that time, although I don't feel bad about it at all now, but that many forms of, especially retail entrepreneurship, the failure rate is really high. It's 90%, if I remember right, if not higher, right? So, and it's not that I failed. I could have kept that store running, but what I could not do was scale. And why I could not scale was not because of my effort and, giving it more time and putting in more hours. There were some market realities. And I think at some point in every entrepreneur's journey, or indeed every professional's journey, it comes down to read the environment, see what direction your industry is going in, see whether you can pivot or change things for yourself or the environment around. And I tried all of those, Pamela. I tried sort of changing the way my store was run. Because I'd worked in tech, I went online very, very early before the big players came in as well. I didn't get very good logistics rates. So as a business model, it wasn't really working for me. But I just said, look, I need to at least have my presence there. Then I tried to sort of reorganize the industry itself. I thought, I'm a lawyer, I have an understanding. And so much of why I was unable to scale was because the industry itself was very, very disorganized. I was in furniture and home decor. There's only a point up to which you can try and like influence your environment. And when you see that it's not going to shift or not shift fast enough, I think the wise thing to do will be to cut your losses before they start to mount, and also to know that it may not be the right time either for your idea or for your model, willing to do what it does take to be relevant in that field, right? So I don't actually, in fact, I went on a sort of lecture tour after that on my learnings as a failed entrepreneur. I didn't see that in any way as a disadvantage. My learnings were incredible, and I think a lot of people benefited from the learnings that I was able to share, right? Yeah, I think it was an incredible journey, but would I do it again? As things stand, not. It was exhausting.
I must say, Sandhya, this is one thing that bonds us also. I am a failed entrepreneur as well. And I wish I met you when I was failing. We would have been having a different conversation today. And I'd also like to add, you mentioned about that the journey is always not successful because of market realities. It reminds me of this book called Outliers. I'm sure you, being an avid reader, you would have read it. It does call out being at the right place at the right time. So entrepreneurship is also quite time bound. Where are you? What are you selling? That is the market reality that many people tend to ignore because they're so soaked in their idea of being successful at what they are doing. So that's a great insight, I must say. So moving on, Sandhya, you moved on to psychology. You found that as a natural fit. How did that decision affect your relationship with friends, family, co-workers? You get to know them better. You're seeing them inside out.
Oh, okay. I'll answer the first part a little separately from the second part, which is that I don't think it was a surprise to any of my friends or family that I took the line of, going inside the brain or the mind or however you want to call it. Actually, I was the last person to be hit on the head for me to realize. I had been told so many times over the years that I should be going in this direction, right? And it finally took a venture capitalist friend who said that you should just become an executive coach. I didn't even know there was something like that existed at the time. And he was like, come have a meeting with me, we'll talk about it. And that sort of sparked my, I think it's also about finding your place in this. I did realize initially that I tended to over empathize, and then that could take me down a spiral of emotions as well. I worked in women's rights briefly, and 25 years ago, it was too hard for me to do because my emotions were I would take them home with me, right? And maybe it was again an accident of time where I was, but that was a thread that was running through me all along. In fact, even as a child, I would talk about wanting to be a psychiatrist. You mentioned that my parents were doctors, and the only place I saw myself in the science and medical field was in psychiatry. But again, those days it was a very distant dream, and there was there were a lot of associations with the profession, and again, just opportunity and accidents of where you were at the right time. For me to come to this more behavioral science, I think really felt like I was coming home more than anything. And I don't think there's a single person in my ecosystem that was surprised that this is where I landed up. I was surprised, but nobody else was. But in terms of how they respond to me, most of my friends actually don't assume that I'm reading their mind, because I really am not. I'm quite tired when I'm done with clients for the day. I'm no different to anybody else. I'm like, if you need me to switch on my coach hat, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm just a layperson. But I have been told very specifically by my kids, please don't use psychology terms with us. Don't use coaching language, and do not try to coach us. And my brother put it. I think he summed it up like my family's pre-warning to me. He said, Sunday, my family called me Sunday. He's like, your coaching is very valuable. Please don't offer it even to me unless I pay you lots of money. What he meant was, don't coach me, please. Okay. So it was already, I was forewarned, it was preempted. I am not allowed to coach anybody unsolicited, and I don't. I mean, of course, you do observe patterns, but I don't think that that's any different to what a layperson might do, maybe with just that little bit of present focus, right? I'm certainly a lot more present for my friends, even when I'm having fun, even when I'm doing something completely brainless. But other than that, I don't think it's really affected any of the relationships much. I always was a person that people would come to, to sound out things for, or as a shoulder to cry on. So that hasn't changed much, I will say.
You're still the go-to friend for people, but that definitely separates you from the coach that you are. And for our listeners, I'd like to add this, that what I heard from your conversation or your narration of your journey, it definitely indicates that pursuing your passion was what worked for you. You mentioned this, you felt like coming home. It's a very profound statement. Coming home means you are getting to something which you really enjoy doing. So finding that career for yourself, making that transition that feels like coming home, is a great shift.
Yes, and I'll say that's only part of it, Pamela. When I said coming home, it also kind of meant that it felt like I felt comfortable in my own skin, which is a little different to us modeling aspirational behaviors. Sometimes we feel like I need to be that, very strict boss, or I need to be that very dynamic leader and constantly on and, lead by example. But in fact, even in leadership, we know today that the more you fit into your own skin, and you have to see if you can fit into that skin, right? Otherwise, perhaps leading a team of 50 or 500 is not the best use of your wisdom, your time, or your energy. And it's in this life of choices, and we are privileged to have these choices. We may as well use our time and energy, which are our two most finite resources, in ways that one, speak to what feels like fits into our skin. But I think also it's a little different, I will say, to pure enjoyment, the way we might visualize it in lay terms. We need to anchor it in something. There are days when I don't want to get out of bed, for an early morning session, or there are days when I feel like, oh man, I've already seen so many clients, do I still have three more left? And before they become a very real person for me. But for that, I feel it's one, very important to have balance in your life, and interests outside of just work. You need to refuel in order to be present for what you serve. And picking up on the serve bit of it, I think it's really important to anchor what it is that you like onto within pillars, or onto something that is either a goal or your values, or you could call it passion, but that passion has to be anchored in something, or it could just burn itself out, right? So likes and dislikes, one part of it, and then the anchoring is the other.
Yes, yes, of course, there is always effort in anything that has to have an outcome. So, Sandhya, you partly answered this, but my next follow up question is, if you could go back in time and begin anew after graduating from law school, how would your approach be this time? How would you approach life? You did answer this partly in the beginning, but I'd like our listeners to really benefit from seeing what you would do with your younger self if you get a chance.
If you peg the timeline at after graduating from law school, it's a little different question. If you'd pegged it 5 years earlier, I would have said that I would have asked my younger self, what feels meaningful for you to be doing, what engages your mind, and where does your natural proclivity lie, and then to all of the adults who said to me, I wasted somebody's law seat, I'd like to say that I hope I've created more fairness and well-being in the world, being an executive coach, than I might have done as a lawyer. So I'm not so sure that education was ever wasted. But it really is this, right? That we feel like we should do something, we ought to do something, or there are so many things that seem aspirational. I mean, a simple example today is that I see so many people pursuing data science, for example. Okay, and I'm cherry picking. There are several aspirational careers today because somewhere we feel, oh my goodness, and I mean, I'm aware that I'm speaking to a mighty force in the AI world, but we feel like, oh my God, AI is coming, jobs are going to be scarce. So let me go after the job that I know will not become redundant. But I would pose the question this way, that if we're all chasing after data science and want to become data analysts or whatever, you're forcing yourself to be a data scientist. You will be competing against somebody who thinks, breathes, and lives data science because that's how they are wired from the inside. Right. So it's a bit of a fallacy to think that we must all rush after. It comes from a scarcity mindset. It's back to the days of, if you weren't a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, you didn't get a job which was synonymous with a better life. And for our parents' generation, it was the way to give their children something that they never had. And every generation goes through this. It's called a collective illusion. But for us, it's having this aspirational job, and to having the good life, and having a steady flow of income, but also all of the above. I want my cake and I want to eat it too. So I will say that you may as well, especially in today, in the uncertain future that we don't even know what job is going to be aspirational tomorrow, or indeed if it's going to be a job as we traditionally know it. A lot of what we consider unpaid work today will probably be the most in demand, right? Like child rearing or caregiving, because that's something that maybe AI won't be able to do as well as we can, right? So you may as well tap into where your attention goes, where your energy goes, where your engagement goes. But that's on you then to not just passively consume data or entertainment. We're behind our screens, we're looking for instant gratification. I will say it is for every child. And when I say child, I mean yourself until your brain fully matures at 24, 25, for you to find things that feel engaging, that feel meaningful, and to start to at least script out, to put your toes into these waters, knowing that every step that you take, even if it's a misstep, is taking you more and more in the direction of the person you always were. Not some mythical person you need to mold out of a fresh block of clay, because we don't get a second block of clay. This is all we have, at
Yeah.
least in this lifetime.
If you could distill two or three pieces of advice you would like to share with them who are seeking to discover their true calling. You did answer it quite well in the previous questions, but I'm sure, I spoke to about 200 odd people to find out if they know how to identify their true calling. And the answer is there is no one way. So, what are your top three advices that you would want to share so that people can go back and start acting? And, the tagline of the show is we listen, we learn from you, and then we go back and apply it in our lives. We act.
What a great question, Pamela. I will say that it's, for me, at least in the work that I do, I use a very, very, well, it's a deceptively simple tactic. One is, you can't go wrong discovering what your uncontaminated self was like. And what we call the uncontaminated self is the natural child, right? What were you like before the world told you who you were? As a famous quote goes. So look to your early childhood, before you were socialized and you knew what it was like to be a good girl or a competitive child or an excellent winner of many prizes. Where did your attention and energy, and where did your playfulness naturally go? Because within play lies your greatest potential energy, right? Children can play endlessly, and that's all of that energy. Imagine if that were directed into something useful. So we find that play, and then we align it with certain values that we want to live by, right? And each of us, this is no one size fits all, but we all have values. And how do we define values? What you're willing to inconvenience yourself for. It's, or dare I say it, the hill that we're willing to die on, right? That these things feel meaningful to me in this world, and sort them out and pick them very, very consciously. And finally, we anchor them as, how does this fit into the rest of my life as well? You can't be a scientist in isolation to the entire academic career or the academic pathway. you will be required to publish papers, you might be required to teach, or so understand what environments you thrive in, understand what that will mean in terms of a life, in terms of how much time you want to give, and what other sides of your personality also need expression. If you are that person that needs to get away to the mountains, once a year or twice a year or whatever it is, you may not be able to do it at the start of your career, but knowing that this is important to you, you will start to find time for it sooner rather than later. You'll be doing like your weekend trips, and not, maybe not the 1 month, but it has to come in the here and now. Not some, there is no mythical future that we're going to build our life. So our career is very much a part of our lives. So one, go to your child self. Two, anchor in values and what feels important and meaningful to you. And three, define the kind of life that your future self, your thriving self, will want to live.
Wow, that is so, so inspirational. Sandhya, I'm sure, one day people would love to see you standing in a podium and giving this kind of advice on a TED talk or a platform of that sort, because you can definitely make an impact on multiple lives. Sandhya, I wish you all the best. I'm sure you are pursuing what you love to do, and you would do only better things from here on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you for doing this. I know how busy you are, but this is again really a passion project for you, and it's you sharing of your wisdom and calling on people that you want to share conversations with, right? So really, hats off to you, and I'm once again such a privilege for me to be here.
Thank you so much, Sandhya.